In our last lecture, we talked about the 8 different divisions of the nervous system. We talked about things that we already know about nerves. Today, we're going to look at how nerves send their signals. Well, nerves are not the only type of cells in a body that send signals. As we learned about before, we have lots of signals going on in cells like epithelial cells, and we also know that many of the proteins themselves send signals. And most of these signals are actually mechanical. For example, when one oxygen binds to hemoglobin, that oxygen triggers a rotation and mechanical motions within the 4 subunits of hemoglobin. But nerves are special. They send electrical signals. And those electrical signals, as you know, are simply charges, positive or negative charges, that repel other charges all the way down a line, kind of like a little conga line of charges moving along. So when you flip on a switch at home, the electricity that's right there at the switch is not exactly the electricity that's going through the lights at that moment. Instead, it's pushing charge after charge after charge that goes down the wire to that light bulb. So this is exactly what's happening in nerves. There's one charge at the beginning of the nerve that sends a push on all the charges down the line to the end of the skinny and long nerve cell. There's always loss in electrical signaling, so nerves are no different from that. And nerves have figured out a way to amplify the signal as it's traveling down the long and skinny nerve cell so that it's not attenuated, so that the signal doesn't become so weak that there's nothing at the end. The way it does it is it amplifies the signal with a gradient. So we've been talking about how there's often a gradient of charges from one side of a membrane to another. And this is kind of like a battery. We discussed how if there's a bunch of positive charges on one side of the membrane and none on the inside, on the other side, it's kind of like having a positive and a neutral or positive and negative terminal on a battery. If you put a wire across that, you can get energy. And nerves have this gradient. Nerves are a little bit like a banana floating in salt water. That's at least a way to remember them. They have high potassium inside. Bananas are known to be high in potassium. And of course, they're floating in salt water, and salt is sodium chloride, so there's a lot of sodium outside. Potassium inside. Potassium is a positively charged ion, and sodium outside, which is also positively charged. Now, you wouldn't maybe think that since they're both positive, they would want to go across the membrane, but that's the whole point of diffusion. When there's a high concentration of any atom or molecule or ion on one side of a barrier, they always want to diffuse to the other side. So the potassium on the inside wants to get out, and the sodium wants to get in. And either way is a release of energy that can power the electrical signal and keep it from wearing out as it goes down the line. So the main point is that when nerves get signals on one side, they transmit it electrically on the other side. And the way they do that is in short bursts. These bursts are called action potentials. So when there are more signals on one side, more activity that leads to nerves being triggered, there are more of these bursts, more of these spikes, and they're more intense. So if you put your hand briefly on a hot object, take it away, there's only a few bursts. If you leave it there, there's going to be a lot of these action potential bursts. And it's a combination of the flowing in of sodium and out of potassium that leads to these action potentials. Earlier, we had a little activity where we imagined how to build a communication device out of string and tin cans. Think back on those tin can telephones that you had in your mind, and what would prevent the tin can telephone from being useful? Well, it's because of the attenuation of the signal. The signal is just getting less and less as you get longer and longer strings. So if you wanted to talk to somebody across town, you wouldn't be able to hear them. How could you overcome this limitation? Well, you could imagine that every once in a while in the string, you put some kind of a powered up box that would take in a small signal and amplify it to wiggle the string more. Well, how is that similar to what I was just discussing about the nerves and their gradients of ions? That gradient of ion, which is at lots of different points along the nerve, is what powers the signal and keeps it going all the way down. Now, a story that goes along with this particular aspect of nerves is the story of how multiple sclerosis causes problems in people. We learned before that nerves are insulated, just like wires have to be insulated. And they are insulated with layers upon layers of lipid. Lipid forms bilayers. The tails of the lipids stick together and form bilayers. And those are going around and around the outside of the nerve. When those myelin layers are destroyed, and it's thought that they're destroyed in multiple sclerosis by the body's own immune system, it leads to problems with signaling. So typically, the idea of trying to treat multiple sclerosis in patients is to destroy the ability of the immune system to attack the myelin sheath. And how do they do that? Well, promising techniques are just to completely knock out the immune system of the person who has MS and replace it with donor cells, cells that are from people who don't have MS. So that's one way to possibly overcome this problem. But there are a lot of hurdles still out there. People are not seeing a cure yet for multiple sclerosis, and it will take a lot of research to develop a true cure to prevent the immune system from attacking these nerves. If you're going a little deeper, now would be a time to read the leaf, How Do Neurons Transmit Electrical Signals Long Distances? And this leaf has a nice image showing how stimulus gets transmitted into a series of bursts of action potential.